And of course, he went home, and I believe they took away his diplomatic credentials, denied him a visa to come back into the United States. So this just didn't start under the Trump administration. This just didn't start over the last several months. This has been going on for over 2 decades, since the revolutionary process in Venezuela started back during the late 1990s. The U.S. has been very, very adamant about arresting and reversing the whole process. And why is this the case? Because U.S. imperialism is still operating on the basis of the Monroe Doctrine from the early part of the 19th century, that anything that occurs in the Western Hemisphere is considered in the interests of the United States. Now, the Monroe Doctrine came out during a period of expansion of the European imperialists across North America. It also related to the competition between Spain and other countries as it related to the Caribbean, Central America, as well as South America. You had other European powers that had colonies and neo-colonies in the Southern Hemisphere. For example, St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands. People think about it as being an American outpost. They have a representative in the U.S. Congress who spoke this week during the Michael Cohen hearings. But 100 years ago or so, that was a colony of Denmark, a country now many people view as being social democratic or at least benign as it relates to imperialism. But they were heavily involved in the Atlantic slave trade as well. They were involved in colonialism. There were other colonies that were set up by the Dutch, the Netherlands, in the Caribbean. Places like Brunei, Curacao. These places are outposts, even today, of the Netherlands. We also had Portugal, which colonized Brazil up into the period of the early part of the 19th century. Brazil was still a colony. Even after it got its independence in the early part of the 19th century, it was under a monarch who ruled according, and also his successors, his children ruled for another 5 to 6 decades in Brazil as a monarchy. And the monarchy was not overthrown until the late 1880s. Brazil had slavery for a longer period of time than North America. From the 15th century, late 15th century, early 16th century, all the way up until 1888, 1889. Slavery ended in Brazil some 30 or more years after it ended in the United States. So we're talking about areas that have been under the yoke of slavery and colonialism for centuries. Cuba, for example. Slavery ended in Cuba 13 years after it ended in the United States, partially ended. And then, of course, there was another process of emancipation that took place even during the 1880s. So we're dealing with an intense situation of U.S. imperialism laying claim to peoples in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's why we're here today. And that's why certain assumptions are made by the corporate media as it relates to Venezuela. They consider it in their backyard. To add more incentive for them, Venezuela, it is said, has the largest known reserves of oil of any other geopolitical region in the world. Just think about that. So what we're seeing is a constant attack, ideological, economic, and military against the people of Venezuela. We saw what happened last weekend. They tried to start or ignite some type of incident there so they can justify a direct military intervention from either Brazil or Colombia. We're opposed to sanctions. Yes, sanctions are an act of war. So the people in Congress, many of them are considered progressives, are saying nothing about the sanctions, or saying sanctions are fine, but they're opposed to military intervention. Well, you can't have it both ways. People who want to condemn the government, the Socialist Unity Party Bolivarian government in Venezuela, but then at the same time say that they're opposed to military intervention. If you say you condemn the government, that implies that you're in favor of regime change. That's right. So how can regime change take place? It's not going to take place voluntarily. It's going to take place either through pressure, economic pressure, psychological warfare, a military coup d'etat, or direct military intervention in Venezuela. We've seen these things happen over the decades. Even for the young people here, open up the books, go to the websites, and see how they destroyed countries, for example, like Ghana in West Africa, how they waged a war against Angola for decades in an effort to overthrow the government and to reverse the revolutionary process. So we're gonna make contact with Jesus, and then after he speaks, people have further questions, comments, we can deal with that. Then we have a few statements of solidarity from different organizations who want to express their solidarity with Venezuela. Then we want to conclude with a discussion on strategy and tactics. What can we do here in Detroit to aid in our solidarity with Venezuela? What can we do to prevent a military intervention? What can we do to have the sanctions lifted? What can we do to further isolate U.S. imperialism over this issue? Because they've used the United Nations, they have not been successful there. China yesterday vetoed a resolution that they were trying to get through to justify military intervention. They have condemned what the U.S. is doing there. Russia has condemned what the U.S. is doing there. The vice president of Venezuela was in the news yesterday saying they were going to move one of their main diplomatic outposts in the European Union to Moscow, because many people in the European Union are going along with the Trump administration. Many people in the Democratic Party, unfortunately, are going along with the Trump administration, even though they claim they don't like him. Right. We hear on MSNBC, CNN, all day long, all night long, how they hate Trump. But they seem to be united on this question, right, the question of imperialism. And we've seen this before as well. They can say, yeah, we don't like this person, we hate them. But hey, when they start beating the war drums, they all line up behind the Pentagon. They all line up behind Wall Street. So anyway, hopefully we can get Jesus, and we will check him out.
Yeah, just a second.
While we're doing that, I just wanted to make an announcement. Yeah, this meeting is put together by the Moratorium Now Coalition and the Michigan Emergency Committee Against War and Injustice. And we share offices with the Communist Workers League, which is a new formation that started here in Detroit last September. We have some new pamphlets that just were printed yesterday, and people want to look at those pamphlets. They deal with economic issues. There's one specifically on Venezuela, there's one on the Middle East, and there's one on China. So before you leave, check out these pamphlets. Also, we're expecting Elena Harada. She was supposed to be here to help co-chair this meeting. Perhaps she's running late, but we'll see. Thanks.
Sorry, everyone. Just a second. Jesus, hello. Can you hear us okay? I'm having trouble hearing you. Yeah, I don't have any sound coming through. Okay.
Oh no.
I'm getting something now, but no, I can't hear your voice at all. I hear some feedback almost.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Great. U.S. hands off Venezuela.
Nice to see you. So it's my time to talk, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Please oblige us.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. Let me go back to something that I wrote down that I want to use it to help me with my words, but basically I want to thank you for inviting me again to talk to you. I want to say thank you to my friends in Detroit. This is not the first time that I spoke to you, and I really enjoyed it. I miss going to Detroit, especially with all that tons of snow. I'm joking. Okay, I got my words already in front of me. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about, I divided my words in 4 parts. The first thing that I want to talk about is about indisputable facts about what has been happening in Venezuela lately. The second part refers to lies, fake news, media warfare, that kind of things. And then I want to talk about what I believe are going to be the next scenarios or the next attacks. And then to end, I want to talk a little bit about what I believe can be done from the US to try to counter what is happening in Venezuela. So just to start, I want to say the first thing that is an indisputable fact is that President Maduro is still the president of Venezuela. No one can deny that. If you go to the United Nations, you will see, and you ask them, you will receive the same answer. The president of Venezuela is Nicolás Maduro. So that's very important to highlight, because the U.S. narrative is that there is no Maduro is not the legitimate president of Venezuela, which is a big lie. Then another indisputable fact is that the army, Venezuelan army, is united in the defense of Maduro, but also in the defense of the constitution and in defense of the anti-imperialism Bolivarian principles. And I believe that that's very important to highlight because the U.S. has been playing and pushing around to try to have our military split or divided, and they haven't achieved that. And if you ask me, I believe that they won't be able to do that. Disregarding that maybe 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 guys from the army defect because they receive payments. I hear people here talking about the right-wingers paying any official defector $20,000 if they defeat. So those are reports. I mean, I haven't seen that information, but I really believe that that's very possible. But anyway, besides that, and besides the threats that are public that you can find on online, in statements from the State Department to the army. Besides that, the army is united around Maduro and around the Constitution. Another fact that you find that maybe you are not aware of is that Chavismo is stronger than ever. And that might sound crazy because we are in the middle of one of the worst economic crises in Venezuelan history. But the truth is that when the Chavismo feels threatened, we are rebel. I mean, we are fierce. We are like, I don't know how to say that. We get united and our Chavista spirit races, especially if you are threatened to be invaded or something like that the U.S. has been doing lately. So the Chavismo spirit is very high right now. Another important thing is that is a fact is that the so-called humanitarian aid did not enter Venezuela. And that's very important because I believe that is a big defeat that the U.S. foreign policy and the Latin American lackeys we inflicted to them last weekend when they were trying to force what they call humanitarian aid, which is basically U.S. military boxes with food. They say, and we know that the history that might be something else, that so-called aid didn't enter Venezuela, and we, the army, the Chavistas, were there in the border doing that. Another important thing is that the economy seems to be stabilizing. It's not perfect. I mean, the situation right now, we are still in this economic crisis that is mostly, if you ask me, a consequence of U.S. sanctions that started in 2015 or 2016 when Obama passed the executive order that declared us an unusual and an extraordinary threat to the U.S. Since then, the economic problems of Venezuela, especially the financial ones, has been increasing. But in the last few weeks, if you ask me, for the last 4 or 5 weeks, the government has been applying monetary policies to reduce the amount of money running in the economy, and that has kept the black market, actually the black market exchange rate is almost disappearing because of those monetary policies. So, and in consequence, the prices has tend to stabilize in recent weeks. And that's very important because the biggest economic problem that we have right now is the hyperinflation. So that's something that I believe that is important for you to know. I believe that another fact is that the so-called coalition of countries supporting Guaido and supporting the U.S. is wearing out, if you ask me. I believe that the coalition of countries that support the U.S. Department of State circus around Venezuela is wearing out because it's absolutely contrary to any principle of international law what they have been trying to do in Venezuela. And you can see that in the Lima Group latest meeting in Bogota when some countries publicly put a distance between them and the proposal of the U.S., Colombia, and Guaido of the possibility of using military force against Venezuela. Also because what Pence says in that meeting, criticizing Guaido for not delivering what he promised of having like a split military in Venezuela. Also, because the Spanish foreign minister has been saying lately that they are not going to recognize the people that Guaido has been naming as ambassadors. And recently, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain said that they cannot accept two ambassadors from one country. So they are going to, the words that he used was that they were going to try to find creative ways to deal with that situation. So that, I mean, those are the declarations that makes you understand that not everyone in the European Union are like happy about what is happening in this aggression from the U.S. towards Venezuela. And actually, in that declaration from the Spanish foreign minister, he said that the U.S. told them that Maduro was not going to last 1 month after the self-proclamation of Guaido on January the 23rd. I believe that the horse circus that the Department of State have created was based in the lie, especially in the lie that they sell to their lackey governments or their satellite governments about the imminence of Maduro's fall. And that haven't happened, and I believe that that won't happen, and that coalition or group of countries that support this U.S. circus, I believe is going out right now at this moment. Now I want to talk about the lies. They say a lot of lies about Venezuela, and one of the big lies that they say is that Chavismo is running out of people. I already mentioned you that that's not true, but it's important to highlight that that's a big lie. One of the lies that you can hear on the media. Disregarding the economic crisis, Chavismo is still there, is alive, and is not going to disappear. Another lie is that the presidential elections of last year, when Maduro won on May 20th, 2018, was not free and was not fair, and that's another lie, because everyone knows that election was called trying to comply with opposition right-wingers' demands. And at the end, the U.S. government told the Venezuelan opposition not to run in that direction, and that's when the opposition parties in Venezuela decided not to run in that election. Even though the same electoral system that elects most of the members of the National Assembly that is controlled right now by the opposition were elected using the same mechanism. So it's like a very hypocritical position from the right-wingers in Venezuela and from the U.S. talking bad about our electoral system and saying that was not fair. And the truth is that almost 10 million Venezuelans voted in those elections, and out of that, like almost 6 million voted for Maduro. So, I mean, I highlight this a lot because whenever you talk to a Chavista, and whenever he's confronted with this proposal from the right-wingers and from the U.S. to have early elections, every Chavista will tell you that they are indignant because of that proposal, because it's like their vote last year do not count because this right-winger or this U.S. government don't like the result of the voting. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, they are ignoring the popular decision of 10 million Venezuelans. I'm not talking about the almost 6 million that voted for Maduro, because there were also around 2 or 3 more million Venezuelans that voted for the other options that were running in that election. So I believe that it's important to highlight that. It's important to highlight that they present a lie in regards to the military, that the military hierarchy is scared for the sanctions. That's not true. I believe that the military hierarchy is not like too scared because of actually yesterday the Department of Treasury announced sanctions against 6 high-ranked Venezuelan commanders in the army, and they announced that they were going to withdraw or cancel visas for 42 members, 42 military officials and their families. I believe that this is like kind of a mobster kind of, because one thing is you try to attack me because I'm a hardcore Chavista, and another thing is that you try to attack my kids, which do not necessarily think like I am. You know what I'm talking about? It's like using mobster tactics to try to scare the Venezuelan military, and they are not getting anything. I mean, what they get out of that is more resistance from the military, if you ask me. Another lie is that people are dying in the streets due to the humanitarian crisis and because the economic crisis in Venezuela, and that's not the truth. We have an economic crisis, that's true. But from there to talk about a humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, there's a big difference. And you have to, and you just have to pay attention to what Chavistas and progressive people are posting on the web, Facebook and Twitter. And if you dig deep inside, you will find videos about people coming to Venezuela and videotaping what lives, the ordinary day-to-day life of Venezuelan is. So it's important for me to tell you that that's a big lie that I hope that you don't buy. Another big lie that they have been trying to position lately is that Maduro is a dictator, authoritarian guy that is killing people in the middle of the streets in Venezuela. And the truth is that that's not happening. Actually, on January the 23rd, the right-wingers tried to create that matrix of opinion, and they actually, I believe, that paid some criminals to create some pokey events in some places, especially in poor neighborhoods in Caracas. But those riots were controlled in 1 or 2 days, and that is not happening currently in Venezuela. But yesterday, for example, one very well-known Venezuelan journalist, right-winger journalist, published in her Twitter account a photo of a policeman beating a kid, like a 10 years old girl, and that journalist said that we need to stop this. Something like Maduro is repressing kids. Maduro police is beating kids in the streets. And our friends find out that that photo was from policemen from Bangladesh in 2012 beating kids in a riot in Bangladesh a few years ago. So, I mean, it's important to be aware that they are using that tactic and they are pushing towards that direction. Another big lie is that Chavistas are born in that truck with the so-called humanitarian aid for Venezuela, and disregarding all the work that we have been trying to do here to present the facts as they are. A lot of people still believe that the Chavista people and the Venezuelan army burned trucks full of humanitarian aid for Venezuela because we are crazy people. And that's a big lie. First of all, we have been receiving humanitarian aid from countries like Cuba, China, Russia without any problem. But those things, humanitarian aid, to be considered humanitarian aid, needs to be agreed and requested by the government. You cannot impose humanitarian aid into a country. That's against the definition of humanitarian aid. So you cannot do that. Another thing related to that is that the Chavista born in that truck, and the truth is that when you see the videos and the photos, you see that the humanitarian volunteers, I mean, the criminals that were close to those trucks that we were trying to push into Venezuela, they were throwing Molotov cocktails. And according to what I saw in some of those videos, those Molotov cocktails fall into the trucks, and that's how the trucks got burned. So that's true. And if you see the images where those trucks, I mean, those trucks not even were in Venezuelan territory because we didn't allow them to enter. And they blamed the National Guard for that, and the National Guard was not close to the truck. So it's an argument that is very crazy, but they position that, lie in the mass media, in the social networks, and we need to counteract those lies. Another big lie is that the coalition supporting the U.S. is getting stronger. And I'm just remembering yesterday, Elliot Abrams was in a press conference in the Department of State, and one of the things that he said was that the thing that he emphasized the most was how strong was the U.S. coalition of countries supporting their initiative, their aggressions against Venezuela. And when you see that, you realize that what he's trying to do is to try to promote something that is falling apart. So anyway, but they have been trying to position that idea also. And I believe that our work is trying to demonstrate that that's not true, and try to show the public that all the facts are around there that shows that coalition is wearing out, as I already said. Now, going to the third part, I mean, I'm talking about possible next scenarios or attacks. One thing that scares me a lot is the possibility of Guaido receiving death threats. I mean, there's a fact that, this is not going to be the first time that the CIA can kill someone and blame the country that they don't like of that. So that's a big possibility right now that, the U.S. or extremist factors decide to kill Guaido just to blame Venezuela of that. That's a possibility, but it's absurd because Guaido was in Venezuela for a month without any problem. If you ask me, I was mad because of that, but I understand why the government, the Venezuelan government didn't do that, because I believe that they were trying to replicate a Chavez approach towards problems like this. A Chavez approach in situations like this was like, let them worn out. Let's don't give them the chance to accuse us of doing something wrong or breaking the law. Let them rode in by themselves. So I believe that that's the strategy that the Venezuelan government is using around Guaido. And even though some Chavistas like me do not like it and prefer him to be in jail because he has break tons of laws, I believe that it's not a bad idea neither, because that way you show that it's contradictory that they talk about a dictatorship and the guy is talking in the middle of the street with 10 million microphones and camera around him every day. So it has its pros and cons, but going back to my words, it's a threat, and that's a possibility that we cannot discard. Another possibility, another problem that might happen right now is the problem of putting Guaido in jail or not. Guaido announced a few days ago that he was coming back to Venezuela, and right now a lot of Chavistas here in Venezuela are wondering what is going to happen if he tries to enter Venezuela. I mean, if the government is going to allow him, which is going to be very crazy because he actually violated some regulations from the Supreme Court that ban him for leaving the country, or if the government is going to let him stay free for a little while. So no one knows, but that's going to create tensions. If you ask me, in the next few days, and we have to be aware of that. They are going to keep threatening the military hierarchy. They are going to push, threat, and use whatever monster mechanism they can use to try to break the military. If you ask me, they are not going to succeed, but they're going to try to keep following that path. Another problem that I see in the future is that was announced by Samuel Moncada, our ambassador for United Nations, a few days ago in the Security Council, when he talks about the Venezuelan Liberation Army that is being formed in Colombia with the support of Duque's government. And if you ask me, I believe that it's going to be armed by these Ukrainian weapons that the Russians are saying that they detected, the intelligence services detected were going to be sent from Ukraine to the right-wingers in Colombia. So that's another possibility of problems in the next few days. If you ask me, I believe that that's not the best option for right-wingers or for the U.S. government, because Colombia is already a complicated country. And in Colombia, they have the ELN, they have the FARC that is very critical of what has been happening with the peace accords. And those guys most of them are Chavistas, are progressive socialist people. And if they open that front in Colombia, I believe that they are going to create a big mess inside Colombia. And of course, they are going to put pressure in border, especially in the places of Venezuela that border with Colombia. They are going to try to promote some attacks to military posts and things like that. So we have to be aware of that, because that's a possibility. They are going to promote riots in the next few days, if you ask me, inside Venezuela, especially the ones related to public services. Public services in Venezuela in the last few days or weeks, I mean, they have been bad for the last 2 or 3 days, but in the last few weeks, I mean, they are worse. I mean, I'm talking about water, I'm talking about electricity, internet, telephone, that kind of things, and that can ignite some sort of discontent among the people and create the critical mass to have some protests and riots on the streets. So we have to be aware of that, because that's a possibility. Another possibility is